In one corner of the English seaside, life expectancy is lower than in parts of the developing world. The United Nations once sent an investigator to see how bad things had got. Not to a war zone, to Essex. These places are mocked as the worst towns in Britain. But the people who live there did not break them. Decisions made hundreds of miles away did. And nowhere shows that more clearly than a forgotten holiday camp on the Essex coast. Jaywick, built in 1928 as a summer escape for working-class Londoners. Cheap wooden chalets sat on a stretch of salt marsh, tiny, flimsy, never designed for anything colder than August. They were beach huts with beds, and for a decade they were perfect. Families packed the train from East London, spent a week by the sea, and went home tanned and happy. Then the war ended, and Britain ran out of houses. People who had lost everything in the Blitz moved into the Jaywick chalets and stayed. Structures built for bank holidays became permanent homes in January. No insulation, no proper foundations, no mains drainage for years. In 1953, the North Sea flood killed 35 people in Jaywick alone. Chalets capsized, the sea wall collapsed, families lost everything in a single tide, and still people stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Nobody rebuilt the flood defences properly. Nobody rehoused the residents. The chalets that survived were patched up, and life carried on in structures that were never meant to see a second winter, let alone a seventh decade. Today, Jaywick has been named the most deprived neighbourhood in England 4 times in a row. No other place has held that title that long. 40% of residents cannot work due to disability or long-term illness. The headmistress of the local primary school once said that when you visit certain parts of Jaywick, you are shocked you are still in England. In 2018, a photograph of its unpaved roads was used in an American election attack ad thousands of miles away. The residents were furious, not because it was unfair, because it was accurate, and nobody at home seemed to care enough to fix it. A £126 million improvement plan has been announced to run over 20 years. Whether it arrives remains to be seen. Jaywick has been waiting for nearly a century. It has learned not to hold its breath. And Jaywick is not the only seaside dream shattered by someone else's idea of progress. Blackpool, once the holiday capital of working-class Britain, 17 million visitors a year in the 1950s. The Tower, the illuminations, 3 piers, landladies doing a roaring trade from June to September. Every boarding house full, every amusement arcade ringing. Then Benidorm happened, 2 weeks in the sun for less than a week in the rain. The visitors dropped from 17 million to around 12 million. And what came next was worse than silence. Landlords from out of town bought up the cheap guest houses and subdivided them into bedsits, filling them with vulnerable tenants on housing benefit. Nobody regulated it, nobody checked the conditions. The holiday town became a dumping ground for people other boroughs did not want to house. The seasonal economy meant half the year had almost no income at all. Drug and alcohol services were overwhelmed. Mental health referrals climbed. And on the streets behind the promenade, the ones the tourists never walk down, the reality looked nothing like the postcards. Boarded up guest houses, overflowing bins, the smell of damp carpet and chip fat in the stairwells. Today, 7 of the 10 most deprived neighbourhoods in England are in Blackpool. Male life expectancy in the worst wards is lower than in some developing countries. The tower still stands, the illuminations still draw millions. But the Blackpool tourists photograph and the Blackpool residents survive in are 2 completely different towns. One is a brand, the other is a crisis, same postcode. Across Britain, that gap between what a town used to be and what it is now is where the damage lives. And nowhere feels that gap more painfully than Grimsby. The world's largest fishing port, that's what Grimsby was. In the 1950s, over 400 trawlers operated out of these docks. Trawlermen would return from 3-week Arctic trips and blow their entire wages on Freeman Street, which was packed with pubs, cinemas, and market stalls. A third of the town worked in fishing. Everyone else depended on it. Then Britain picked a fight with Iceland and lost. 3 times. The Cod Wars locked Grimsby's fleet out of the waters they had fished for generations. And it was not just economics. Trawling was one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth. Men died in Arctic storms. There is a memorial garden on the docks now with rusted anchors instead of gravestones. When the industry collapsed, the identity collapsed with it. 5 trawlers left by 2013, out of 400. Freeman Street is mostly shuttered. The pubs where trawlermen drank 3 days' worth of wages in a single session are boarded up or converted into something else entirely. The ice factory, which once produced over 1,000 tons of ice a day to keep the catch fresh, stands crumbling on the Dock Peninsula. Grade 2-star listed, too important to demolish, too expensive to save. The surrounding streets, known locally as the Casbah, were once a town within a town. Chandlers, ropeworks, smokehouses, banks, cafes, a post office. Today, 73% of those buildings are empty. Grimsby still processes 70% of the United Kingdom's fish, but none of it is caught there anymore. It arrives by lorry or by container from Iceland. The irony is sharp enough to cut. The town that lost its fishing grounds to Iceland now buys its fish from Iceland, and 70% of Grimsby's residents voted for Brexit, partly because they were told it would bring the fishing back. The trawlers did not return. The quotas did not change, and Grimsby is still waiting for someone to notice. If Grimsby lost its livelihood to a foreign policy dispute, the next town lost something even harder to fight, being forgotten. Morecambe, Lancashire. Once called the Naples of the North, and it was not entirely a joke. A Victorian resort known for variety shows. The Midland Hotel, an Art Deco masterpiece on the seafront. Views across the bay to the Lake District fells that would make an estate agent weep. It peaked in the 50s and 60s, then cheap flights killed it. But unlike Blackpool, Morecambe did not have the tower or the brand recognition. It just had the view. And when the visitors left, there was nothing underneath to catch the fall. The Winter Gardens closed in 1977. It has sat derelict ever since, despite decades of campaigns to save it. A building that once hosted some of the biggest acts in British entertainment is now slowly being eaten by weather and neglect. The Midland Hotel was rescued and restored, but the seafront around it is tired. The Eric Morecambe statue draws tourists for a photograph. They take the picture, get back in the car, and drive to the Lake District. Morecambe is 5 miles from some of the most expensive property in England, and it might as well be 500. A town in the shadow of somewhere more glamorous, more funded, more visible. That is not just a coastal problem. Oldham, Greater Manchester, a mill town that once produced more cotton than anywhere else on Earth. More spindles than France and Germany combined. The chimneys were so thick they blotted out the sun on a still day. The clatter of looms was the soundtrack of the town. Everything was cotton, the jobs, the architecture, the identity, the money. The mills closed through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Some were demolished. Many just stand empty. Enormous Victorian brick buildings, 6 stories high, with smashed windows and pigeons in the spinning rooms. You can see them from the motorway. You can't miss them. They're the biggest buildings in town, and nobody's used them in 40 years. In 2001, Oldham erupted, some of the worst race riots in modern British history, driven by segregation between white and Asian communities that had been allowed to harden over decades without anyone intervening. The Ritchie report described Oldham as a town of parallel lives, people living side by side who never met. 2 decades on, Oldham is still grappling with that legacy. The tram link to Manchester helps with access, but it also makes it easier to leave than to stay. And that's the problem with connecting a struggling town to a thriving city. The talent flows one way. And if cotton killed Oldham slowly, steel killed Rotherham overnight. Rotherham, South Yorkshire, steel town, empire builder. Rotherham steel went into bridges, railways, warships, the hulls of ocean liners. The Guest and Crimes Foundry made fire hydrants that ended up on every continent on Earth. Walk through Rotherham's older streets and you can still read the history in the architecture. Big Victorian houses built for managers, tight terraces built for workers, churches built for everyone. The population doubled and doubled again through the Industrial Revolution. By the mid-20th century, steel was Rotherham and Rotherham was steel. Then the works shut. The pits closed, not slowly like cotton in Oldham. Fast. Thousands of skilled jobs vanished in less than a generation. Men who'd spent their lives at the furnace had nothing. The town joined the long list of South Yorkshire communities that built Britain's infrastructure and were thanked with the dole queue. And then Rotherham's story took a turn that no amount of regeneration funding could undo. Between the late 1980s and the early 2010s, at least 1,400 children were sexually exploited in the town. The J report of 2014 described a catastrophic failure by the council and police to protect vulnerable young people. Over more than a decade, the details were devastating. The institutional failures were systemic. The scandal defined Rotherham in the national consciousness for a generation. It overshadowed the regeneration efforts, the new college campus, the people trying to build something different. Every time the town's name appeared in a headline, it was for the same reason. Ask someone from the south what they know about Rotherham, and most will name one thing out of 1,000 years of history. The town is not the scandal, but for millions of people, it's the only thing they've heard. And that kind of reputation doesn't wash off in a decade. It might not wash off in a lifetime. And the damage of being defined by your worst moment is something the next town knows all about too. Except Peterborough's worst moment wasn't a scandal, it was a plan. Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, designated a new town in 1967, which sounded like progress at the time. The idea was to relieve pressure on London by building a modern city from scratch in the Fens. It expanded rapidly through the 70s and 80s with housing estates and industrial parks. But nobody built the schools, surgeries, community centres and transport links to match. The infrastructure was always one step behind the population. Then, in the 2000s, rapid migration added tens of thousands of new residents to a town that was already running on empty. Services that were stretched before snapped under the weight. GP waiting lists lengthened, school places ran short, and the town centre, built in the concrete-heavy style of the 70s, aged badly. Ring roads cut the centre off from the neighbourhoods around it. A shopping precinct that felt dated by the 90s now feels abandoned in parts. Peterborough has a railway station that connects you to London in 45 minutes. But the town itself gives you no reason to stay once you arrive. It has potential, a cathedral, a riverside, space to grow. What it does not have is anyone in Westminster who has noticed. And when a new town fails, nobody even knows who to blame. The architects, the planners, the government that promised a city and delivered a ring road. And if Peterborough was built too fast, the next town was hollowed out too quietly. Luton, Bedfordshire, 30 miles from London, home to one of the busiest airports in the country, and regularly voted the worst place to live in England. The car industry left. Vauxhall, which employed tens of thousands at its Luton plant across generations, scaled back and effectively stopped making vehicles in the early years of the 21st century. An entire workforce, trained in one skill, suddenly had nowhere to go. The airport brings jobs, but they are low-paid, shift-based, and outside the town centre. Housing is unaffordable on local wages, but cheap compared to London, which means Luton has become a pressure valve for people priced out of the capital. Families arrive needing schools, GP surgeries, and housing support and find a town that was already struggling to provide those things. Luton's population is young, diverse, and growing. Its university is expanding. There are pockets of genuine community strength that the worst places lists never mention. But the town centre is tired, the traffic is relentless, and the overriding feeling is of a place that exists to serve somewhere else. London's airport, London's overflow, London's problem exported 30 miles up the M1. And then there is the town that sits in the shadow of the second biggest city in Britain and still cannot catch any of its light. Walsall, West Midlands, dead last out of 50 cities in the 2025 Good Growth Index, lowest scores for jobs, skills and income. The official worst city in England for quality of life, according to the people who measure these things. Walsall made leather goods for 300 years, saddles, bridles, harnesses, whips. When the British Empire needed to put an officer on a horse, the saddle came from Walsall. Then cars replaced horses and nobody needed a saddler anymore. Light manufacturing filled some of the gap, but never all of it. And Walsall's real problem isn't just lost industry, it's geography. The town sits 6 miles from Birmingham, close enough to be treated as a suburb, far enough away to miss the investment, the transport upgrades, and the regeneration money that flows into the bigger city. When the Commonwealth Games came to Birmingham, Walsall didn't benefit. When HS2 was planned, Walsall wasn't on the route. When Birmingham gets a headline, Walsall gets forgotten. The town centre has one of the highest shop vacancy rates in the West Midlands. The new art gallery, designed by Caruso St. John and opened in 2000, is genuinely world-class. International standard, award-winning architecture. It sits in a high street that can't sustain a department store. That disconnect tells you everything. It's not that nobody tried, it's that one landmark building can't fix systemic neglect. And when the gap between your best asset and your everyday reality is that wide, closing it feels almost impossible. And that brings us to the last town, the one that might sum up every place on this list. Clacton-on-Sea, Essex, just down the road from Jaywick, which makes it both the beginning and the end of this story. Same arc as Blackpool and Morecambe. Victorian seaside resort, post-war peak. Cheap flights, slow decline. But Clacton did something the other towns on this list haven't. It voted. In 2014, Clacton became the first constituency in Britain to elect a UK IP Member of Parliament. It voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. Its current MP is Nigel Farage. The town is older than the national average, whiter than the national average, and more economically deprived than the national average. It is, statistically, exactly the kind of place that feels most forgotten by whoever is running the country at any given time, and it responded by electing the loudest voice it could find. Whether that worked depends on who you ask. Jaywick is still the most deprived neighbourhood in England. Clacton's town centre still has gaps in the high street where shops used to be. The pier is still there, the beach is still there, the potential is still there. But potential without investment is just scenery. And Clacton, like every town on this list, has had enough of scenery. It wants results. And it's been waiting a very long time. These aren't the worst places to live. They're the places that paid the price for someone else's idea of progress. A holiday camp that became a housing crisis. A resort town turned into a dumping ground, a fishing port sacrificed to foreign policy, a mill town left to rot when the cotton moved east. And as long as we keep blaming the towns instead of the decisions, there will always be another Jaywick, another Blackpool, another Grimsby. If you want to see more of how Britain quietly creates these places on the map, subscribe. We have plenty more where this came from. Thanks for watching.